Folks, we're continuing. We continue in chapter 38. Chapter 38, in one word, bikavana, with intent. To understand the concept of doing something with mindfulness, deliberate intent, as opposed to doing it without intent, right? That is our subject. So, as the Alter Rebbe explained, doing a mitzvah, fulfilling God's will, bringing it into action, whether it's through speech as a form of action, or physical act of giving charity, putting on tefillin, lighting Shabbos candles, a physical act of making Kiddush Friday night, of observing Shabbos, all those things, the physical act without any intent, we are connected to God. We create a dwelling place for God in this world. However, it's not an illuminated act. When we have kavanah, we have intent, that action becomes illuminated. It becomes illuminated. Now, so a person would probably think, that when you do it with intent, what does it mean? It means I'm there, I'm engaged, I'm involved, right? And it's not just, doing something that God wants, but I'm also in it, involved in it. So the Alter Rebbe says something very interesting. The fact that kavanah means you're doing something that's not just a bodily action, and it's like a body without a soul. When you do it with kavanah, it's like the soul animating the body, giving it life. So likewise, this action has life, therefore it's an illuminated action, right? This kavanah is superior. You know why? Because that's what God wants. He wants that we should use our intellect, we should use our thought, we should use our heart to engage in the active mitzvah that we're doing. Whether it's saying the Shema, a prayer, a blessing, that it should be illuminated with the divine will that radiates and is enclosed in the person's kavanah. Because that's infinitely loftier, that illumination of God's supernal will that radiates when you do an act of a mitzvah that's done with kavanah, as opposed to without kavanah, without intent. Okay. So now he goes and breaks this down. The superiority of kavanah, the intent, the mindfulness, is similar to the superiority of the light of the soul over the body. Just as the body, so in the body, you have the actual act of the mitzvah, right? And that body is so you have the body of the mitzvah, and you have the kavanah, the intent of the mitzvah, the soul of the mitzvah. Two things that God desires. Even God is one simplistic whole oneness, so his desire is not like, I want this and I want that. Like, like a human being, we are, the desires that we have, they could be in different directions and not necessarily united. Definitely not simplistically whole oneness. But God's desire for both the act and the intent in the act are a simplistic whole oneness with him, indivisible. So how much does he want it? The act? Infinitely so. How much does he want the intent? Infinitely so. Period. Okay? He wants it. Both. Now, as we learned, by the way, the intent without the act You don't have an attachment to God. The act without the intent, you do have an attachment. But yet, that being said, God wants the intent, the kavanah, in the act. He wants it. He wants it infinitely so, just as he wants it infinitely so, the act itself. Now, when it comes to the mitzvah and their kavanah, we can differentiate them onto 4 levels. And those 4 levels tie in with what we spoke about yesterday, God's name, the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters in God's name of the Shem Havaya, which then in turn are the source of all of the 4 divisions of creation. The Yud is human, the Hey is animal, the Vav is particular for vegetation, and the latter Hey is particular for daimon, for inanimate objects. So in the body versus the soul, so we're going to divide 2 and 2. In the body, you have 2 things. In the body of a mitzvah, what do you have? The action that is involved in doing the mitzvah. The act of just putting on the tefillin. The action of just taking your hand and putting a coin into a charity box. The action of just lighting Shabbos candles. Or the action of taking a cup, and putting wine for making Kiddush or Havdalah for Shabbos. There's an action involved in that. That action is the latter Hey in God's name that is the source of the inanimate. Then we have vegetation. Vegetation means something that grows. Well, that is the letter Vav in God's name. That refers to vegetation. Vegetation is analogous to speech, right? To speech. Speech is, has a person grow on you, and you'll hear them. They speak. So speech meaning that we verbalize our prayers. We verbalize the blessing. We verbalize our Torah learning. Right? You can have Torah learning in thought, that's inanimate. You can have Torah learning in verbalizing it. Prayer you can't have in thought, right? You has to be verbalized in order to be prayer. In any case, so those are the 2 aspects. And those are of the body of an action mitzvah. Action means act literally, and speech is also considered like an action. It's a small action, so to speak, not a loud action, as the act of giving. But then there is the body of the mitzvah, that sometimes the embodiment of the mitzvah is in speech, like in prayer. Prayer, there's no action. The action is that you're verbalizing the prayer. That's the action. Now we have left, in God's name, the first 2 letters, the Yud that represents the human, and the Hey that represents the animal, which is the soul aspect of the mitzvah, meaning the intent, the kavanah. What is that explanation? Tomorrow's class. Get that tomorrow.